The Holy Gospel this morning comes from St. Luke in the 13th chapter. Now, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." And when he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites, does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" And when he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. The gospel of the Lord. You may be seated. You know, they say Jesus lived 3.5 years doing active ministry that the Gospels record. And in the process of that, it's always helpful to remember when we come across a story of a healing like this that Jesus was healing all the time. And we don't have all his healings recorded, but the ones we do have are important. And the writers share them for many and various reasons. And Luke seems to have shared this reason, this particular story, for a reason more than just Jesus healing a woman. It seems to be that Jesus wants to show us something else. And this woman and her ailment are a perfect example of what he wants us to see. So, the way the story goes is Jesus is in the synagogue on a Sabbath. And if you've been in Bible study with me, you know that whenever you come across a story in the New Testament that says it was on a Sabbath day when Jesus did something, it's probably not going to end well for Jesus. There's going to be somebody who doesn't like it. That's just a little clue. So he's in there on the Sabbath, and there is a woman who is bent over. And Jesus notices her, and he invites her to come over, and he touches her, and she's cured. So I want you to just put this image in your mind. What we have is we have a woman who is bent over. And Jesus heals her, and Luke says she stands up straight and praises God. What we see is that this woman, who for the last 18 years, because of this particular physical ailment that she had, and we don't know how she got the ailment, she could have been born with it. You know, there are so many things that have to go right in order for one of us to come out even remotely healthy out of the womb, that it's amazing that we actually have any healthy children at all. But here was a woman perhaps who for 18 years had been bent over at the 90-degree angle. Or maybe, she is more of a middle-aged woman, and 18 years ago, while she was carrying water or something happened, she fell and broke her back. Or maybe it was just the vicissitudes of age that osteoporosis had forced her back into a steadily 90-degree position. But notice what happens when Jesus heals her. Her vision for the last 18 years has been the ground right in front of her feet. All she sees is dirt and the tops of her feet. She probably did not have shoes. And like most of us, she spent most of her time going, "I should really clip these toenails." But now she stands. And now she sees. Maybe for the first time, she sees the tops of trees. And she finally understands what it means when they say that birds fly. Because for 18 years, they'd only hopped across her feet. And she sees, for example, all that is able to be out there in the rest of the world. She's able to look somebody other than a 3-year-old right in the eye and see the smile. See the laughter when she makes one of those corny jokes. She's always making jokes, and she hears the laughter, but she never sees the smile. She gets to see the world that God has created, that God had intended for her, that God has intended for all of us. And no longer bent over staring at a 2-foot square patch of dirt in front of us. Now she stands to see the beauty and the wonder of the world writ large. To see the grace and glory that comes from being part of God's wonderful creation. To see more than just brown dirt and muddied stones, but to be able to see the vibrancy of a blue, the lightness of a pink, to be able to see our world. When Jesus heals somebody, he doesn't just cure them of a physical ailment. He brings them to total health with themselves, with their neighbors, and with God. The healing of Jesus is never just to cure an ailment, but always to right somebody back to a relationship with themselves, with us, with God. You know, we live in a world where so many things can go wrong. Where little boys can be crossing a street and get run over in the blink of an eye. We live in a world where there's so many things that are seemingly just piling up, and frustrations just seem to just mount up, that we begin to just narrow our view. And by narrowing our view, we hang out with people who share that view, and it becomes even narrower, because now when we gather together, we hear the same things and see the same things that we see, and it just continually constricts and constricts and constricts until we are of ill health. Bent over, perhaps not in body, but in spirit and in soul and in mind, looking at the same brown dirt, hoping it will become the water of life. And the brown dirt was never meant to be the water of life. And we have narrowed our lives to such a point that we can no longer stand up straight. And the stenosis that runs through our bones soon runs through our thoughts, runs through our arteries and hardens, so that the beating compassion of God that lives within us is fainter and fainter, and sicker we get. And it's precisely for this that Jesus has entered into our world. As the living presence of God amongst us, he gathers us around waters of baptism, bread and wine of his body, and feeds us so that we can stand up straight. Perhaps our bodies are no longer able to stand up straight. Perhaps the actual stenosis is too bad, or perhaps there's no way we can overcome this particular injury, but our spirits can stand up straight. Our minds stand up straight. And we can begin to see out into the world all that God has brought our way. And rather to be laser focused on a narrow patch of dirt, we begin to see the great pasture of God's cosmos and creation laid out for us as something to be stewarded and cared for, to be taken and to be loved. It is truly a gift to be healed by Jesus Christ. And the physical ailments, they may come and they may go. They're part of life. It's interesting that Luke says that this woman, that Satan had given her this particular ailment. Well, in Jesus' time, they didn't really believe Satan gave you ailments. There were only two reasons you could get ailments. Either your parents screwed up or you screwed up. But Luke says this woman's ailment is beyond our knowledge. We don't know why she's bent like this. But it didn't matter to Jesus. He straightened her body. And in doing so, he straightened her sight. And in doing so, he straightened you and I who listen to this story 2,000 years later. From not being so myopically focused on one or two things that seem to frustrate us and anger us, but rather to open our vision to a world of wonder and grace. And of course, because Jesus did this on a Sabbath, somebody had an issue. They call in this story this person the leader of the synagogue. Indeed. And you can understand this person saying, hey, listen, we do this kind of stuff 6 days a week. On the one day we got scheduled to do something else. Why? Why do you do it? And Jesus says, don't you see? Don't you see that God set this world out for us, not as something that we have to somehow be afraid of? This world and all of its multiplicity, this world and its diversity, this world and all the things that seem to scare us is not something that we have to hide from, but rather something that we're to glory in, because it is God's, given to us as a gift. And it's no different whether it's a Wednesday or, in their case, a Saturday, or ours a Sunday. It is a gift to be appreciated. It is a gift to be truly seen. To be truly seen. To have not only this woman look her friends for the first time in 18 years in the eye, but to understand that God looks you right in the eye. And when God looks at you, God smiles down like a mother who strokes the breast of her child, the grandfather who tussles his grandson's hair, the lover who holds his intended close, and looking into those eyes of brown or blue or green or hazel or any of the other options. God sees you. God sees you. And you are loved beyond your wildest imagination. And in that love, stand straight, look out, and see the world that God has made. Amen.